free market perspective, I still think this is a stagflationary period, given the amount of government spending and debt, and in particular what the Federal Reserve has done to the value of the dollar. Welcome to this week's economy. I'm your host, Dr. Vance Ginn. I hope you're having a prosperous day. Well, today I want to jump right into it because we've got a lot to discuss over the last week. This is talking about stagflation. Is it here to stay? We're going to talk about inflation, the stock market, state economies, what the Federal Reserve did, and what it means to you, and so much more. So let's start off with the Federal Reserve left its federal funds rate target unchanged in the range of 5.25 to 5.5%. It's been here since last summer. It's likely to stay in this range for a while because inflation continues to remain higher than what they expect or where they would like it to be of about 2%. Now, really, inflation should be 0% over time, but they have had this idea in their mind, the Federal Reserve and a lot of economists said that 2% should be enough to keep greasing the wheels of the economy over time. I don't think that's right. I think that's wrong. I think we should allow for deflation, which means declining prices across the general level of prices, and then have some inflation here and there, but ultimately it should be 0% over time. And that's often what you get when you have a commodity-based standard like the gold standard, is you will see some of those periods. But we've been brainwashed to think that we shouldn't have deflation, so inflation is the only thing that matters, and that's what the Federal Reserve continues to pump more money, putting more money in the economy and everything else. And when you look at this recent statement by the Federal Reserve, they did note that they're going to start to slow the reductions in their assets, when really they should be increasing the reductions, as I've been talking about. They've still got about $7.4 trillion on their balance sheet, which means that they have a lot of excess liquidity that's in the marketplace compared to it only being $4 trillion before the pandemic. That's still $3+ trillion that have been put in the economy over a very short period of time. So it's good that they're continuing to reduce it, as they were at about $95 billion a month. Actually, it's been slower than that recently, but about $95 billion a month. They're going to start reducing that to $60 billion by not buying off as much of the Treasury debt whenever it rolls over and maturing. They're not going to do anything with the mortgage-backed securities, which they should let those start to expire as well. So I think what this is going to do is contribute to more inflationary pressures out there in the economy because you have too much money chasing too few goods. And whenever I look at this sort of thing, this is another reason why I believe that we're going to have stagflation for a longer period. Some economists are out there saying that this is not stagflation that we're in today because the unemployment rate's low, inflation is coming down or not as high as it was before, and so this is not a period of stagflation. However, I'm not buying that story. I think inflation is still too high. Even the measure of core personal consumption expenditures inflation that the Federal Reserve likes to use is up 2.8% year over year. They would like for it to be 2%. So it's almost 50% higher than where they would like it to be, and I don't see it coming down to 2% or below that for a while because really they want an average of 2%. So this is not a good situation there. And if you look at CPI, the Consumer Price Index, it's up 3.5% year over year. So we've still got this higher level of inflation, and the stagnation to me has nothing to do with the unemployment rate because the unemployment rate actually is a bad signal of the economy. When people drop out of the labor market, they also drop out of being unemployed, and that artificially brings down the unemployment rate. So is it better to have a lower unemployment rate when fewer people are looking for a job? I don't think so. There are some problems that are going on there. And so if you look at the labor force participation rate, the employment to population ratio for the entire economy, not just the prime age, they're very low overall. And this changed the dynamic of the labor market after the pandemic and the shutdowns and everything else. A lot of baby boomers retired for better or worse, but that means that they're going to be on, living off their pensions, not as much productivity in the economy for a longer period of time. That kind of pushed them in that direction. And so that also led to a lower unemployment rate. And when you talk about all the amount of people looking at stagflation on Google searches, that's spiked recently. That's an indication of how people are feeling compared to what some economists are saying out there. I'm here to bring you the truth, bring you the way that I think about it. And from a free market perspective, I still think this is a stagflationary period, given the amount of government spending and debt, and in particular what the Federal Reserve has done to the value of the dollar and reducing our purchasing power. Whether you look at it from the PCE or CPI, since January 2021, when Biden took office and a lot more money printing and everything else, we've seen purchasing power be reduced substantially. This is not a good situation. And so I'm going to keep talking about that. In other news, the stock market took a big hit in April. Basically, this is because there's a lot of inflationary pressure out there, higher interest rates, earnings are coming down some, and we're due for a bubble to bust. This has been a bubble for a long time as the price to earning ratios have been too high in the stock market, particularly the S&P 500. And so I think we're going to see more of this, more volatility into the future, because we've had too much government, too big government policies coming into the situation, and that's created economic uncertainty and distortions that will continue, especially as the Federal Reserve doesn't cut their balance sheet more. I think they should get it to at least $4 trillion, back to where they were before, as quickly as possible. Government barriers is another thing in the news about work is a major problem to those, right? We really need fewer government barriers, less minimum wages, occupational licenses, taxes, government spending, safety net programs. All this stuff distorts people's leisure labor choices. We need fewer of those. Let the markets work. Stop getting government involved in all these things. Speaking of government don't getting involved in things, there was a new report out, or an article recently in the Wall Street Journal talking about the share of single-family homes purchased by investors by portfolio size has increased to about 25% in the last 4 or 5 years. And this has given some reason for some quote-unquote conservatives to say that we should have legislation to come in and reduce or restrict the amount of investors that are giving money to the housing market or buying up this property. I get that from one perspective, because there's a case for the American dream is to own a home. And if more investors are buying those homes, that leaves less supply for people to buy homes. The problem is that over the last few years, we've been having higher and higher interest rates, so demand is going down. Supply has been restricted because housing prices were so high, there was less buy-in to a lot of those housing as well. And so there was liquidity that was provided by a lot of these investors. If that is restricted or goes away, there's going to be less demand for housing. There's also going to be less supply of houses that are going to be built in the process. And this could it would make the situation worse for those who want to own a home. Because at the end of the day, the American dream is also about renting a home. It's not just about owning a home. Each person has their own idea of what their American dream is. We shouldn't be forcing that through government regulation or anything else. And so I think that's a bad situation. In other news, state economies, Texas continues to expand and have more job creation and lead the way over the last year, although that job growth is slowing. And also, you have historic high spent on government schooling in Texas, but not much on the return on investment. That's a bad situation. In Louisiana, things are still not looking so great on the labor market side or on the economic side. However, I think from the new approach by Governor Landry, there is some bright spots, some highlights to be looking forward to in the future from school choice and some other things that are going on. So don't forget to check out the show notes at vanceginn.substack.com. In other news on my media hits, watch my podcast interview with Dr. Dan Sutter of Troy University on his show, Conversations, as we discuss the economy, inflation, growth, in ways that let people prosper. In other sort of media stuff that I've been doing lately, U.S. Senator Sanders' 32-hour workweek act is well-intentioned but terrible policy. I made this case in my recent piece at American Institute for Economic Research. Be sure to check that one out. Basically saying let the market work. Again, voluntary exchange is better than government mandates. You can also read my commentary at Governing with John Hendrickson at Iowans for Tax Relief Foundations on the problems with the universal basic income. Again, this is getting in the way of labor leisure choices. We should not have that happen. Check out my interview on Fox Business's Cavuto Coast to Coast on why the G20 2% wealth tax proposal is just a bad redistribution scheme from those who are productive to unproductive government bureaucrats and everything else. Don't miss my Let People Prosper episode with Dr. Josh Rowell this past Monday of Stanford's Hoover Institution on the pandemic response, fiscal solvency, and his time at the White House, and more. And don't miss the upcoming episode on Monday with Dr. James Brohl, who's Senior Fellow at Competitive Enterprise Institute, on the high cost of regulation, his insights on regulatory cost-benefit analyses, and much more. Remember, free market capitalism is the best path to let people prosper. One thing I did want to mention is that my mom, Melody Lane, she passed away 2 years ago on April 27, 2022 from end-stage liver disease. I miss her every day. As I mentioned a couple weeks ago, my dad passed away on April 13th, so April is a tough month overall for me. But she gave me so much insights of being a father or being a parent as I live with her, a single mother, and everything else. And so I learned so much of love and everything else. And I got a lot of my education from her, the teachings as well. So anyway, keep me in my prayers as I'm going through some of that. The quote of the week is by Milton Friedman: "Nothing is so permanent as a temporary government program." We got to remember this when we're spending all this money on Ukraine and Israel and Taiwan, all this $100 billion package. A lot of this is going to be made permanent, and they're going to continue to expand it. But how much more can we do this? Don't let temporary programs become permanent programs, okay? And the Bible verse of the week is 2 Peter 1:3. God has given us everything we need for living a godly life. Government is not God, right? We can't say that they're God or think of them as being God. Too often, government is becoming the first line of defense instead of the last line of defense. We need to get back to that last line of defense and shrink the size and scope of government, and that will allow us to have more ability to prosper and praise God and worship Him in so many other ways, and for our families and everything else. So that's something I wanted to leave you with there. Please get in touch with me if you needed policy analysis, a speaker, an interview, or other things that a free market economist like me can help you with on podcast or something else. And don't forget to get the paid material below on my Substack podcast, where our Substack newsletter, where you can go in, get information about that with so much more insights and a lot more there. You can get all this stuff at vanceginn.substack.com or vanceginn.com. And until next time, let people prosper.